Hey guys, welcome to 2024. Every year, except for last year, I've always done kind of a video with some viewpoints, expectations, maybe some things to consider in the year ahead. And 2024 is a really interesting year. It's one of those years that if I just told you what I was thinking, you'd think I was fear-mongering. So what I wanted to do was kind of couple this with some ideas to kind of help you through navigating some of this stuff, because just because there's something that changes or something that seems more difficult, if you're aware of it ahead of time, it could be opportunity for you. To sum things up for 2024, if I could come up with one word for it, it would be chaos. I've been reading a book by Jordan Peterson. It's called the 12 Rules for Life. If you haven't read this book, it's a fantastic book. I suggest you read it. It's an antidote to chaos. And I thought this was interesting because it kind of fits in line with my viewpoint as to what we can be expecting in 2024. Basically, when value systems in a society, in a government, in a community are betrayed, the ending result is chaos. Because when the value systems break down, you enter a period of chaos. Some of the systems that we're talking about can go well beyond our control, right? Currency, for example, some of that is within our control as a government. But when certain systems that we've been used to break down and they change, it's a betrayal to our belief in that system, and that is what ends up causing chaos. Now, at the end of each period of chaos, there's usually some sort of new order, some sort of new global world order, whatever you want to put in there. And so that's where, if you're aware of these breakdowns, if you're aware of these changes, and instead of it being chaotic for you, hopefully you can find opportunity within it. For example, during COVID, the global elites found a lot of opportunity for a great reset. I wanted to read a passage from this book to you, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan Peterson, because I thought it helped explain this a little bit. He says, "I came to realize that shared belief systems made people intelligible to one another. Systems weren't just about belief. People who live by the same code are rendered mutually predictable to one another. They act in keeping with each other's expectations and desires. They can cooperate. They can even compete peacefully because everyone knows what to expect from everyone else. A shared belief system simplifies everyone. Shared belief systems simplify the world. There is perhaps nothing more important than the maintenance of this organization, this simplification. If it is threatened, the great ship of state rocks." I think what he's saying there is so true about society. Because if you look at society, if you look at communities, if you look at governments, these systems work because people have this preconceived idea of how people act within that system. But when the system begins to break down, when the system begins to go through changes, that's when you start to experience chaos within the people within that system. So why do I think this applies to 2024? Well, without question, a lot of you are already probably thinking the election, the 2024 election this year. It's the election of dire consequences. And I know that kind of sounds like a cliche to say because every election seems to be the election of dire consequences. But this year's election is extraordinary. In U.S. history, it is very odd to see an election like this. In fact, we haven't seen an election like this since the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln won the election in 1860 with one of the most unpopular votes in U.S. history. Unpopular meaning that he had the least amount of people voting in favor of him. And if you look back at that election, candidates or chosen candidates weren't on each state's ballot. There were certain candidates that were removed from ballots, not allowed on certain ballots, didn't make the state's ballot. For whatever reason, there were people around this country voting that didn't feel that they had a say in the federal vote because their candidate wasn't available in each state, whatever it was. And just the way that this whole election worked out, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And regardless of what people say, Abraham Lincoln's goal wasn't to take off and end slavery. There was a lot more breakdown that happened that led up to the Civil War. The point is that it was one of the most controversial and interesting elections in U.S. history. Since then, we have had two main parties who tend to be on the ballot in each and every state. There's still a qualification that people have to go through. I think I just heard RFK Jr. got qualified on the Utah ballot, which is, exciting news for his campaign. Not every person running for president is going to make it on each state's ballot. So they kind of have to make this workaround to qualify for the ballots. But what we haven't seen are states removing people who are qualified for the ballot for other reasons, for their own kind of creative assumptions. That is actually starting to happen right now. You saw how Donald Trump was pulled off the Colorado ballot. Maine pulled Trump off of the ballot up there. A lot of you are probably thinking, well, it's perfectly legal under the 14th Amendment, whatever. That actually is not the purpose of the 14th Amendment, nor should it be construed that way. But it is being put out there that way, and I have a feeling that what we'll end up seeing is the Supreme Court putting him back on those ballots. There are a couple reasons for that. Number one, he hasn't been proven guilty in a court of law for a crime. And some of you are probably a little confused by this because there was actually an acquittal by the Senate of Trump for insurrection during the insurrection impeachment inquiry. That is the only, legal process in which anybody has gone through to say whether he is guilty or not guilty. And to take him to court through the court system for the same crime, there's actually a case out there right now whether or not that would be double jeopardy because he's already been tried by the U.S. Senate. The lawmakers have already tried him and acquitted him. Now, there was the J6 report, which accuses Trump, but that is a report. It is not an actual ruling against him. So what the actions of Colorado and Maine have done, first and foremost, is they have removed somebody who has not been through the due process of a criminal investigation and proven guilty from their ballots, which is in and of itself illegal. Another thing that I find interesting in this is, what they're accusing Trump of for insurrection. When you look back at Abraham Lincoln, for example, he actually mobilized the National Guard, mobilized troops to stop people from voting to leave the Union. So he actually brought forth an army to prevent people from voting to leave a union. He then led troops against states that at the time had the right to vote and leave the Union. He led an army against those states to bring them back into the Union. So when we talk about the possibilities of what Trump did as an insurrection versus what has been done in the past, in American past, and then the irony of throwing the 14th Amendment as the reason for keeping this president off the ballot. I don't think when you get into the nitty-gritties of this and the Supreme Court looks at it and they dig down deep into the history of the United States and what was the reasoning behind Section 3, my guess is that it was not going to apply to Donald Trump, the sitting president at the time of that occurrence. Needless to say, the way that the court systems have been going, 2024 is going to be an interesting election, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see the first president elected from behind bars. And there's no law against that. The people can elect somebody from sitting behind bars. I mean, that's the fascinating part about all of this, is there's nothing that says you can't put that person forward as your candidate. This is a country where we are the people. But Trump isn't the only interesting candidate out there. I mean, there's a lot of Republican candidates. We just don't ever hear from them. And that's because the DNC and the RNC have effectively canceled primaries. I mean, we still have some primary debates through the RNC. It's as if the parties have already chosen who their electors will be and who will be competing next year. And that is a bit scary to me because I think that there are a lot of voters who are going to lose trust over the system because of that. If we don't have a fair primary period, then what's going to lead to a fair election? And then the other question I have, seeing how divided our country is and how I mean, scornful people have become. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if you think about the two men that everybody's scornful over, it's even more ridiculous. Under what circumstances are the Democrats going to accept a Trump win? And under what circumstances are the Republicans going to accept a Biden win? I don't see how either party, under any circumstance, is going to accept the outcome of the 2024 elections. And that is going to continue to exacerbate the problem of people losing faith in how the system is set up. I'm actually kind of hoping to see how RFK Jr. does as a third party candidate. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for RFK or I'm going to vote for Trump. I'm definitely not going to vote for Biden. But my point is that as you watch how this unfolds, it's going to be interesting to see how a third-party candidate performs in this type of environment. And I actually think if he can perform well, it could bring some trust back into the system. Now, the 2024 elections, I think, are going to have global consequences as well. And this is going to appear on several different levels. Under the current administration, we've seen war now break out in Ukraine and Gaza. These are major global conflicts, and we'll get more into Gaza in a few moments. But America is no longer the backbone to global peace or global order, whatever you want to call it. America's backbone has been broken. And I think that anybody else who wants to test that broken backbone is going to do that while the current administration is in place, because it's predictable how they're going to respond or not respond, what they are going to do or not going to do. And so there's going to be this desperation, I think, depending on how the elections go and how Biden is performing, for other countries around the world to look at it as a last-ditch opportunity to make a move if they're going to make a move, because they can get away with it under the current administration. If it looks like Biden is not ahead in the polls, I think that our 2024 election cycle could cause more issues overseas. Countries like China, who have been threatening to do something for a while, haven't done it. Well, this is kind of their last-ditch effort, because if a stronger person is in the White House, it's going to be a lot harder for somebody to pursue a conflict without having more severe repercussions. Our current administration is also extremely vulnerable. Number one, our president is compromised in numerous ways with Ukraine and China. I think the other issue is that they're compromised by their voters, because they're down so low in their polls they can't afford to possibly lose any voters. And right now, when you looked at some of the conflicts and the way that the current administration is handling them, if they were to embrace a little more backbone, if they were to step up their game a little bit, they would lose voters. If they were to let things go, they would lose voters. So they're in a compromising situation, being so low on the polls as it is, not having a backbone, not having a direction, and kind of that wishy-washiness, I think, is going to make 2024 even more opportunistic. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening. I mean, if you look at the war in Ukraine, since the new year, Russia has picked up their bombings tremendously. I mean, we've had some of the most severe drone attacks since the beginning of the war happen just at the beginning of this year, end of last year, with the Ukraine-Russian conflict. When you look at what's happening over in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, and the involvement of Yemen over the holidays, and that escalating to the involvement of Iran. I mean, at this point in time, Iran is most definitely involved in the conflicts over there. Seeing these types of escalations happen, this is what I'm talking about. I think, when we get into 2024, the most common words you're going to hear on mass media is escalated. This situation has escalated. Nobody's ever going to come out and say, we're at war. I mean, Iran's not going to say, we're at war, we just sent a destroyer out to the Red Sea. But what you will hear is that all of these positions keep escalating the conflict. And I think that that's going to be a theme throughout 2024, and to the point where I think in the next year, China will actually make a move on Taiwan. And again, that all comes down to, you have one of the strongest nations in the world, the United States, entering a period of chaos in our electoral system, in our dollar, and I'll get to that in a second, in many different ways. Chaos, a loss of confidence, and these other countries that have been looking for an opportunity are seeing it, and they're taking it. You also have heard reports recently that 17 people on the FBI terrorist list were arrested at the southern border. There's no telling how many people on that list have made it across the border. There are over a couple million people that are on the terror watch list. But I do think that for the same reasons that we can expect escalation on a global front in 2024, I also think that sleeper cells here in the United States are going to look at 2024 as an opportunity as well, because they're already making moves. They're trying to get people across the southern borders, and it's just a matter of time before we actually see something escalate here in that capacity. I think that we all knew it was a possibility last year when Hamas and Israel broke out into conflict, but I think it becomes more of a reality in 2024 as we start to see some social unrest around the elections, because that's most likely going to happen. I mean, it's happened at every election for the last several, and it's been escalating, right? I think that they're going to find opportunities within the chaos. The other thing on that note that I question about the border is you've got an unbelievable amount of people rushing towards the border. And in 2024, if Biden is not doing well in the polls, which he is not right now, I think you're going to see those numbers escalate as well, because people are going to want to get across the border. I mean, you literally have people illegally crossing the border and then seeking out Border Patrol to be processed. It's like our Border Patrol has become the U.S.'s customer service agents. And so you have this overwhelming amount of people coming across illegally, then searching out Border Patrol. And what happens then is it overwhelms our security down there. And there's no telling how many terrorists can slip off. I mean, this is in many ways being done on purpose. And we haven't been able to get our hands wrapped around it. And I don't think this administration will be able to. And for that reason, I think we can expect the border crisis to become more severe this year as desperation sets in and says, hey, if we don't get across now, we're not going to get across in the future, because they're going to elect somebody else who's actually going to do something about it. The election cycle also leads into what I think is going to be a much bigger factor for you and I in 2024, and that is monetary policy. Because if you think about it, think about who the Federal Reserve Chairman is, Jerome Powell. He was appointed by Trump, but Trump and Jerome Powell had a lot of contention when Trump was in office. There's a lot of bad baggage there, right? So Powell is going to do everything in his power to keep Biden in office, or whoever would go run for the Democratic Party instead of Biden. I mean, we still don't know for sure. I wouldn't put a prediction on it that Biden is going to be the Democratic candidate. I would think that they would put somebody else out there at this point in time. But Powell is going to do whatever he can to not get Trump elected, because essentially if Trump gets elected, he loses his job. I mean, let's think about it. As we get into 2024, we've already heard the Fed kind of pivot on raising interest rates to cutting, possibly doing 3 cuts next year. And the reason why that would make the current president or the current administration look good, and the whoever's going to replace him in that administration look good, is because it would spur economic growth. It almost certainly would, but it would also cause, I mean, it's kind of a fake economic growth. When you pump a bunch of money into something, it's inorganic growth that happens within the economy, and then that ultimately spurs inflation. And we saw this back when Jimmy Carter ran for president. We saw a similar scenario. If you look back to the early 1970s, the Fed had to raise interest rates several times to slow inflation. Ultimately, when Jimmy Carter ran for president, they flipped the policy and started cutting interest rates. They started cutting interest rates where you saw a real change. And by that, when you hike interest rates and you still are seeing inflation that's double your target, you haven't met the change that you want to see. But what they ended up doing was they ended up cutting interest rates to put a favorable president in office. And immediately following the next year, you had inflation get out of control, 15%. I mean, it was unreal what happened in the 70s. And that's the same scenario that we're facing right now. And so for that reason, I think 2024 is going to be an extraordinary year for alternative assets. Cryptocurrencies are probably going to have a year that's very similar in style to 2021, where you had these massive upside moves. It's going to be a market that swings a lot as people take profits, but at the end of the year, I think we're going to see it improve from where it is now dramatically. So, in 2022, cryptocurrencies kind of had a really bad year. 2023, they had some good, steady growth. This is what I would call an accumulation phase. And 2024, I think cryptocurrencies are going to have an extraordinary year. And I'm not offering investment advice. I don't know much about cryptocurrencies at all. I have opened a Coinbase wallet. If you'd like to send me your favorite coins, I'll take a look at them. I'm winking at you. From everything that I'm seeing, fundamentally speaking, the US dollar is going to tank. Even though we just went through this period of interest rate hikes, the US dollar had its worst performing year since 2020 last year. And part of that has to do with the fact that other countries, because of sanctions that have been put on them, are going around those sanctions by trading amongst their own currencies instead of the US dollar. And just like people in the cryptocurrency market can tell you, when you a currency, the value of it depends on its scarcity in many ways, and its use adds to that scarcity. So when global trade is occurring in the US dollar, it creates a sense of value in the US dollar because people are having to convert their currency to the US dollar to then trade. But what we actually saw towards the end of 2023 is a lot of these countries who have had sanctions put on them or want to trade with countries that have had sanctions put on them have started trading within their own local currencies. The Chinese digital yuan became the fourth largest currency in the world last year, even though the Chinese economy it's complete bogus. But it actually gained in popularity fairly quickly because of a lot of the sanctions, because of a lot of the conflict. And it's been a long time coming that a lot of the BRICS nations have wanted to move away from the dominated US dollar. It's just the sanctions and the other conflicts have really kind of helped propel that. And so as we get into 2024, between interest rate cuts, because they've got to win the election, if they're going to do whatever they can to win the election for the current administration. So between interest rate cuts, the ongoing push away from the U.S. dollar, all of these things are telling me that the U.S. dollar is in a collapse mode. There's not a whole lot there to save it. Because all of this stuff, when we talk about cryptocurrency, when we talk about all of this, it's all based on perception. I mean, none of these things actually hold any true value. Some people would argue that Bitcoin holds some sort of in true value because it is limited in supply. And that's why I think people are going to flood in to some of these alternative currency markets in 2024. But the collapse of the US dollar is going to cause problems for all of us here at home. So when we look at food insecurity, for example, currently 1 in 5 children in the United States are considered food insecure, and 1 in 7 adults. And that's actually an increase. We kind of had this period of time during COVID where food insecurity went widespread for a short period of time, and then it kind of got itself back under control. But over the past year or so, we've started to see more and more people become food insecure. And so now we're getting back to this point where food insecurity is going to become a real question as we run into the future. And as the dollar goes down in value, it's going to make things more difficult for U.S. consumers to be able to afford staple goods that are globally traded. And it's not just about the food that we can grow here at home. Okay. Yeah, we grow a lot of food here at home. The government's not going to tell somebody you can't sell your grain to another country because their dollar's worth more and you're going to get a better return on it. I mean, that's not the way the U.S. works. That's not the way we want it to work. But it's also going to increase the cost of inputs. So right now, the cost of shipping grain cost of shipping oil, a lot of things has gone way up. The freight charges have gone up 178% because we're having to ship around the Red Sea due to conflict. That's increasing the costs of the food products that you buy at the store, especially food products that are shipped to this country. Rice, because of El Nino, has already hit kind of a scarcity level and pushing the price up. It's going to be more and more expensive because the shipping costs are going up. Input costs here in the United States have gotten so high and it's gotten so tough for a lot of farmers. In 2023, we saw an unbelievable amount of farmers filing for bankruptcy. We saw a huge decline in agricultural incomes across the United States. And so these costs are going to have a direct input on your food affordability. The other thing that we've still been facing is we've been still in this culling phase of the cattle industry in the United States. That means that they're still reducing herd size, or at least they haven't entered the herd building size. So once we enter herd building, that's going to reduce the amount of supply on beef on the market. Beef is a staple protein in the United States. So as the price of beef goes up, the price of alternatives will follow. So pork and chicken will also go up. I could do a whole video just on some of the food things, so I'm going to leave some of that out. But in short, in 2024, we can expect that the pressure on the dollar, the pressure that we feel on the value of our currency is going to reflect as part of the food insecurity problem that's already been unfolding. And it's going to, escalate the problem as we get into 2024. There are ways that you can offset that. You can grow a victory garden. And, if you have the space, it wouldn't be a bad idea to grow a market garden, because food is valuable. And the more expensive it becomes, the more money you can make off of growing it, trading it. It's one of those things where everybody's always going to have food. If you can produce it in times where the dollar's going down in value, you're in a good position. I just wanted to throw in here real quick, as we see interest rate cuts for the United States in 2024, I also think that we're going to see economic stimulus coming from China. And both of those will have an impact on currency markets like Bitcoin, because those currencies aren't just going against the US dollar, but they're going against, they're attracting liquidity and investment from around the world. So anytime we see countries ease on their monetary policy or do a stimulus, and it wouldn't surprise me to see a Biden stimulus in 2024, but anytime you see the stimulus programs, you end up seeing more money moving into the currency market. And China is probably on the verge of a major stimulus package heading into the first quarter to half of 2024. This banking situation we saw in 2023 was rather interesting because we saw 5 regional banks fail. And usually that's a precursor to a much bigger problem. We've pulled over $1 trillion out of the market in 2023 through hiking interest rates. And I think that there are a lot of banks that are in trouble that we probably don't know about. And generally, when you start to see some of these banks closing down, it's a sign that there's a bigger issue around the corner. And a lot of times, like in 2007-8, there was a period of calm before the big storm hit, right? This time around, the Federal Reserve has already kind of pulled, or the FDIC has already pulled a lot of rabbits out of their hat, so to speak. And I don't know how many rabbits they have left. At this point in time, they've pretty much guaranteed all deposits in a federally insured FDIC bank. So it's no longer $250,000. It's, however much money you have in the bank is now going to be federally insured. I think in 2024, if the banking crisis proceeds, because there's currently a crisis, and I don't think that anything has changed that. As it proceeds, we may hit the point where we start having the conversation. I don't think it's going to happen, but we start seeing the conversation of nationalizing some banks in the United States. And essentially, when some of these banks do go under, in a way, they are nationalized by the FDIC. But I think that is going to be the next shoe to drop, is as these bigger banks start to face a capital crisis, the conversation may actually turn to the unthinkable, which would be nationalization. If you look back, it does feel a little bit like deja vu right now. The banking sector is cutting tens of thousands of jobs across the United States. Retail stores are starting to shut down across the United States. The commercial real estate industry is on the brink of collapse. It could happen. All right, so what else do I think about 2024? I think we're actually going to see the end of Zelensky. I think that he'll either be taken out by a coup or some other means that matters. His all or nothing mentality is really kind of put him in a pinch. He's having to force people to go to war that don't want to go to war. They're getting pretty extreme with the way that they're handling things. And throughout history, tyrants are usually taken out one way or another. And I think that Zelensky is a tyrant, and I think that he will be taken out one way or the other, unless he comes to the table and bargains for an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I feel like a lot of times leaders trap themselves into their own narratives and belief systems to the point of their own execution, so to speak. And I think that he will be in some way removed from office in 2024. Somebody else is going to take the reins, and I don't know how it's going to be done, but that's just my thoughts on it. I think he's making some big mistakes. The more he loses the financial backing from other countries, the more disruption it's going to cause within Ukraine. Something's got to give. Maybe he'll do a confidence vote and get voted out. Who knows? But canceling elections was probably his smartest move if he wanted to stay into power. But long term, I don't think he's going to make it. Based on some of the things that I've been talking about in this video, it seems like anything could lead to a black swan event in 2024. And it does seem likely, given the fragile state of everything, that a black swan event is more than likely in 2024. It could be that the banking sector itself is a black swan event in the U.S. It could be our government debt. I mean, that's the other thing you have to remember is we have to cut interest rates because our government is paying $1 trillion. 20% of taxpayer money is going towards just servicing the debt. Our government can't afford to stay in business anymore without cutting interest rates. I mean, that's a very serious problem. So there's no telling what the black swan event is going to be, but I do think that there's probably going to be a black swan event that nobody can really put their finger on right now, but a lot of people feel like it's out there. So my suggestion for you would be to simplify your life in as many ways as you can, to, again, go back and consider ways that you can grow some of your own food, because that is one of those costs that's not going to go down anytime soon. It's just going to go up. So we have to figure out a way to offset those costs. And growing food can offset your grocery bill hundreds of dollars a month, put that money back into your pocket. It could also give you something that you could trade and barter with locally, with friends, with family, whatever it is. Food during World War II was often used as a bartering tool, and I think that we're entering a phase on a global scale of escalation where we're not really that far off. Begin thinking like they did back in the 1900s when food was 50% of a household's expenses, and how you could cut that down. Energy is not something that I've really gotten into in this video, but obviously we've got a few headwinds when it comes to energy in 2024, especially with conflicts in the Red Sea, in the Middle East, conflicts with Ukraine and Russia. Energy seems to be facing a lot of upward momentum as far as cost basis goes. I think we're going to see oil reach close to $150 a barrel at some point in time in 2024. Now, all of these things fluctuate. Markets always fluctuate. It's always speculative. And so the best thing you can do if you're worried, I mean, energy prices can swing in markets like this. I did a video back in 2019 explaining this. We're in a commodity boom between 2019 going into 2020 through 2030, a boom cycle for commodities. That means that those prices are ultimately going up. It can create some dramatic swing events where you have oil hitting 150 and then dropping back down to 100 or 120 and then rising again to 145 dollars a barrel. And that's a lot of money, and we're not used to paying for fuel at the pump that high. That would translate to $4 or $5 a gallon. We're barely getting used to $3 a gallon, right? So what I would suggest you do when it comes to energy is that you find ways to stockpile, large amounts of fuel. I've seen fuel trailers. I've seen all sorts of different things that could help you offset some of those energy costs, at least with your car even, where you might be able to store fuel or buy it in bulk and then, refill or top off whenever the prices are lower to help you avoid some of those higher prices. It's going to be impossible, I think, to ultimately avoid it, especially as global conflict continues to escalate in 2024. But energy is probably one of my larger concerns as well. Backup energy is one of my larger concerns. We can't rule out the possibility of attacks against our infrastructure. We can't rule out the possibilities, of even EMPs, although I don't think that they're that likely. But the other thing is, what happens when energy costs just get too out of control and they're too hard to pay for. I've shown the EcoFlow system that we have for our house several times. We basically have 2 Delta Pros and 2 400-watt solar panels that we set up to those. And we could run our house quite efficiently with at least the energy we need to keep on our cold storage and the things that we need for long periods of time with that system. They currently have that system still on sale. They have a New Year's sale going on now. You could actually buy a home power kit, an $8,000 kit for like $4,000 off right now. But those are things to start thinking about, energy, different types of energy sources, propane, fuel, solar, whatever it is that you can use to offset some of your costs. Because if the dollar breaks down too much, energy is the thing that's going to cost you the most. Food will probably be the second most. And food is going to go up with energy costs. It's just kind of a compilation. And those are 2 things that I feel like with a reasonable investment, you can protect yourself on. I mean, who knows? The Strait of Hormuz could get shut down any moment. Are you ready for that? You're probably not as much as you think you are, because you probably don't realize how much that stuff impacts your wallet. I also think reestablishing traditional values in our family lives with our kids is going to be extremely important. So many people are blown away by modern day BS that it makes it even harder to deal with some of the unpredictability of the future. But turning back to traditional values, and that's something that I like about Jordan Peterson's book, is he teaches people to work on valuing themselves, work on valuing, building their own independence away from these systems to avoid chaos. And that is something that as parents, we can instill in our own children. As adults, we can instill it in ourselves and in our relationships by making the choice to focus back on values of family, self-worth, self-governance, self-preparedness. I'm going to read you one more passage out of this book in closing here. Through the elevation and development of the individual and through the willingness of everyone to shoulder the burden of being and to take the heroic path is the only way out of this terrible dilemma. We must each adapt as much responsibility as possible for individual life, society, and the world. We must each tell the truth and repair what is in disrepair, and break down and recreate what is old and outdated. It is in this manner that we can and must reduce the suffering that poisons the world. Anyway, I hope you guys had a great New Year, and I'll have some more As a Man Thinketh coming out soon.